Alright, what's up everybody? Today I'm going to show you how to remove the lower control arms on your first gen Nissan Xterra. This should be the same for, I believe, 98 to 04. And let's get into why I'm doing this on mine. So as you can see, I've got this side all the way apart. If you can see here, this is an aftermarket upper control arm, and I've got some Bilstein shocks and stuff. So this Xterra has been lifted. I had a shop do it because I didn't have the time. And I've recently learned to do your work yourself because shops just kind of cut corners. So these are some Moog aftermarket lower control arms that I have to remove because I've had my torsion bars skip on me a few times now. And that's because the angle is wrong. So over here I've got some OE control arms. You can see that there's corrosion in there and stuff, but I had them soak in some acid and I got all the rust off of them, and then I primed them. I'm also going to bed line them just for protection purposes. Yeah, so basically I'm going to show you how to replace your lower control arm. Do not buy aftermarket if you need to do this job. Get some OEM, whether that be from a junkyard or maybe from Nissan, but it's probably going to be secondhand to get some OEM ones. But it's worth it to just get some new bushings in them and some new ball joints in them. So yeah, I'm going to show you how to do this. So here I have every tool I used for the other side. So the smallest thing you're going to need is a 12, and that's going to be for these ABS lines. So this bolt right here. On the other side, it was a 12 up here for me too, but this looks like it's going to be a 10. And the largest I'm going to need is this 27. However, if you're going to replace your ball joints, you're also going to need a big honkin' socket. It is this guy right here. And this is a 1 7/8 socket. If you have an impact ratchet, you're going to like this job a bit more than if you don't. But that's fine. So let's get started. All right, so as you can see right up towards the top, that's the torsion bar adjuster and the bolt that sits there. Got this, don't even know what to call this type of wrench, but it's a box end wrench and it's got a bend in it. That's what I'm using to get up to the top. There's going to be a lock nut and just a regular nut that holds the other side of the bolt in. I've already broken loose the lock nut. I'm just going to thread it all the way off with my fingers. And if this is your first time taking these bolts out and you don't have fresh ones, you might have to do it with the wrench all the way up, just because those threads could be a little bit dirty, especially if you take your rig on the trail. Let's see. There we go. There's first bolt. Now I'm going to slide this wrench on to the nut itself. Probably going to have to do that this way. And then it's going to be a little bit of a maneuver here. But I'm going to get my impact on the bottom, and then I'm going to hold both. Better to do this with two hands if you can, but it can also be a little bit tricky to get in there. Put the impact in the wrong mode. All right, there we go. Now we should be good to just loosen that. So basically what I just did there is I unloaded the spring pressure. So this torsion bar is a giant spring. That's why you won't see a spring up front. And it slides into the teeth of both the adjuster and the control arm itself. And so I always start with that because it's going to be, in my opinion, it's the best to take off first, just because it gets it out of your way. And also you don't have to worry about pressure on your control arm when you're removing other control arms from it, or the shock, or anything like that. let's put this out, that'd be great. Let's see here. Any day now. There we go. All right, and then there's a little rounded kind of nut washer type thing that goes right up top. You want to face this rounded part down. All right, now the rear of the torsion bar is all loose. All right, so now we're moving to the anchor or the foot, depends on what you want to call it. I call it the foot. It's the same thing. So basically that's going to be this bolt and these two bolts here. In my experience, this front bolt, these are obviously aftermarket nuts, just because I've gone in here a couple times and I've stripped a couple, which is never fun. So these are going to be a 22. I usually hit this with my impact, just like that. Makes it nice and simple. Now for the other one, it's a little bit more time consuming. So basically you're going to take a 14mm wrench, hopefully you can see that, and a 14mm socket. And then you're just going to kind of slide under here awkwardly. And you get to the top one, maybe, if the top one allows you to. And you just get in here with your ratchet. And you just take that on out. So as you can see, we've got that whole anchor unbolted. In my case, this is going to have to require a pry. I think it's just because of how these control arms mount this. It's not sitting flush evenly. It's sitting at kind of an angle. That's what I'm dealing with my torsion bars. So this needs to be pried off of my control arms like that. And then I'm going to have to pry it up a little bit more to be able to slide the torsion bar back. There it is. And then I'm just going to pull this whole torsion bar out of the adjuster. Let's see. There we go. All right. Now you've got your torsion bar out. You want to be careful to make sure that you have the right one on each side. Torsion bar should be labeled. These are some aftermarket ones from 4x4 parts. So if this does not go to plan, putting the originals back in, and I still have torsion bar issues, I'm probably going to go back to OEM. But I don't think these are the issue. I believe it's actually the control arm. That's what I found out on the forum. Anyway, let's continue. So now, basically, we have a couple things that we need to remove on these control arms. We got to remove this tie rod. We got to remove this upper control arm. We got to remove the nut for the hub to mount to the lower control arm. We have the sway bar link, the brake caliper, and the bolt on the shock. Then we have these bolts for the lower control arm, but we'll get there when we get there. So basically what I'm going to start out doing is I'm just going to go through and grab all the cotter pins, straighten them out, and hopefully they'll cooperate enough so that I can actually remove them. All right, so now all the cotter pins are out. I decided not to bore you guys with that footage because all of them decided to be kind of a pain. I also got this nut on the sway bar link off. In my case, I've replaced these. I believe the stock ones are 15 or 14 millimeter. Mine are 15. But yeah, now let's move on to the next nut we have to remove. So that's going to be the one on my tie rod. Once again, I have aftermarket. They're 22. They might also be 21, but a lot of these bolts on these xterras are 22 in my experience. So now I'm just gonna remove it like that. And then what I do is I'll go through and I'll flip the castle nut and thread it back on a bit, just past the castle part of the nut, and get it to be just about smooth on there. And then I'll take my hammer. Sometimes this works, sometimes it doesn't, but in my case it's been working all right because all this stuff is pretty freshly on there. So that gets that out of the way, so now I can move this freely. All right, so now I'm going to remove the nuts on the hub, and I'll show you what that looks like. So in my case, I've got some aftermarket mile marker hubs. So I've got some Allens to remove. Every xterra that I've seen has Allens on the original automatic locking hubs. And those are probably going to be the same size as these, which I believe is a, let's see, I actually have the key I'm using, which is a 6. So all of the Allen should be a 6 on the regular hub. Don't quote me on that, but that's what I remember. These front ones are a lot smaller, but if you have aftermarket hubs, you probably know what size they're going to be for your application. But yeah, now I'm just going to remove all these bolts and get down to the inner part of the hub. All right, so once you get that cover off on these mile marker ones, you're gonna have a snap ring. I believe the regular hubs have a snap ring once you take the cover off as well. But yeah, so now comes the snap ring pliers. I hate dealing with these guys. This is just a cheap set I got from Harbor Freight. It's fine, it gets the job done, but snap rings kind of suck. So I'm gonna work on getting that off, and then I'll update you once I've got this whole piece off. All right, so this is where our hubs are gonna look the same, whether you have a aftermarket unit or not. That'll just be the outside. I just removed that piece with that snap ring, and I just removed all those Allen bolts. In my case, using the impact with an Allen bit on it is what I prefer to do, just because otherwise you're gonna be spinning the whole hub and it's a pain. I didn't have my Allen key, so I used a T40 Torx bit. It's not the greatest thing to use because you can damage those, but I'm planning on replacing them because they're getting all rusty. But here, I'm gonna show you what needs to happen next. Let's see if I can place the phone. Okay, hopefully that stays. All right, so next, I've got my impact screwdriver. This is for removing like rotor set screws and stuff. But I use it in here too sometimes because these bolts can get pretty tight. But in most cases you'll be able to just turn them like that. And it's a good time, it's probably a good time for me to replace these because they're getting kind of stripped. They're just 2 little screws. If you're in here a lot, just repacking your bearings or whatever, you should probably consider replacing them. All right, so now we've got a different part. You can use an Allen key or a flathead or whatever, but you just grab in here and you can just take this piece off comes right out like that. I'm gonna get my flathead, which is all the way over here. And I'm gonna go into this spot right here, this little hole, and I'm gonna try and remove it. In my case, this one's kind of tight, so I can go through and just get my flathead in there and tap it downward. Then it'll start moving, and then you just spin it around. It's basically just a giant nut. It'll come right off. If you have enough grease on it, it'll probably just stay attached to your flathead, kind of like that. All right, now the hub is ready to be removed. So now we gotta tackle the caliper, the upper ball joint, and the lower ball joint. So let's get to it. All right, so pardon the weird flipping that the iPhone camera does, but I just wanted to have it face me so I could see that I'm showing you the right thing. So I just removed the caliper. There's a bolt right here. There's a bolt right here. They're both 22 millimeter. Now it's gonna be this bottom joint and this top joint. I'm gonna start with the top joint. I'll show you how that works. Make sure I have my attachment is on the other side. If you have a wrench, that'll work, but I've got a crow's foot attachment to use. And pardon me here, I get mixed up on what's loose and what's not. I believe I've got this on loosen. Maybe. Let's see. Yeah. So in my case, these nuts were not very tight. I think the shop that did my lift just ignored it, which is less than ideal. So if you have these on there pretty tight, which hopefully you do, because otherwise you're risking losing your hub off your upper control arm. If you have them on pretty tight, hit them with some heat and they should come right off. So now I'm just gonna tap my upper control arm with my hammer. And that should be good. Now I track the knot. Okay, sweet. So for the time being, I'm just gonna keep that kind of pressed in there so that I can work on the other one, which is, let's see, I've got so much dirt in my hub now because it's been sitting under here, which is fine, it happens, right? So now for this bottom nut, it's a 27 millimeter. If that'll focus, yeah. So it's 27 millimeter, and I don't have enough room to get my impact under there. So I am just going to grab this here breaker bar, ratcheting breaker bar, and I'm just gonna break it on loose. Okay, before I remove that all the way, I'm now going to go back to the two nuts or bolts I talked about earlier for this line here. Hopefully you can see that, but it's going to be the 12, and on this side, in my case, the 10. You should be able to just get it with a little ratchet. They shouldn't be too tight because they're smaller bolts. But my 10 mil socket is on the other side, so I'm gonna have to go grab that real quick. All right, that's on out. Let's go get that. All right, hope this video is a good guideline for you guys out there working on xterras. I know it's very few of us. At least in my experience, there's not too much videos on much, and that's why I'm making this video, because the closest I have to doing the whole control arm job is a ball joint job, which is also a good video. I forgot the guy's name who made the video, but this is going to be the whole guideline for your whole control arm assembly, which is basically just a few more steps than the actual ball joint, lower ball joint assembly video. So now basically I'm just going to hold this up, remove this nut all the way. Okay, we're good. And now I just have a little bit of work to do here. I'm getting this removed. For some reason the ball joint shoe just wants to kind of slide off that arm. I don't know why that is, but nice. Well, that part is off. Sometimes things just come off like that. It is what it is. I'm just gonna put that over there. And it's just gonna sit like so. Okay. So now I should be able to slide this down off this ball joint. But I'm also gonna have to push against the CV axle. We're gonna pop it out, slide it down like that. So there's your knuckle. This is where your wheel bearing goes along, and in that hub is the actual wheel bearings. Basically, you're just gonna rub it with some wheel bearing grease. So while I do this job, I'm also gonna repack my wheel bearings. And Xterra Rob's got a really good video on repacking the wheel bearings, so I'll be sure to link that in the description if you're looking for something like that. So now we only have a few more bolts to remove to get this whole assembly on out. So we've got the bolt on the shock, we've got this rear bolt here, and this front bolt here. I believe the guy's name is Ruined Films. He also had an Xterra build that he was doing, and in his video, he did have a video on removing the lower control arm. He said that the best way to go about it is to reinstall your torsion bar anchor on the back here to keep the threads of this head for this bolt in place. So now I'm just going to get started on removing those bolts, and we'll catch up here in a second. All right, so I've got both the front bolt and the rear bolt out now. So this is what the rear bolt looks like. So that's why you use the method of putting the anchor on, and you don't even need to bolt it on. It's easier to bolt it on because then it's not going to go anywhere while you're removing it. But in my case, I just held it on there while I cranked on the other side with my ratchet, that breaker bar right there, and both bolts came right out. This is what the front bolt looks like. So both sides of this is going to be a 22, and the side that's a nut on this one is going to be a 22 as well. Now we should be good to just remove the whole control arm. So I'll show how that goes. Yeah, this rear bushing that sits in the frame here really holds on, and it's meant to do that. So there we go. That's a control arm, and that's out. All right, so before I go, there's a couple more things I'd like to show. So whenever I do a job like this, I just try to put the bolts that I can back in their spots. So the control arm bolts are just sitting in there so that I don't lose track of them. The bolt to the shock is sitting in the shock, and the castle nuts here are just sitting on the arms. Now, there's another thing I'd like to show. So here's the ball joint. And I'm gonna try and reuse these ball joints. They threaded the nut on improperly on the other one. I don't know if that was Moog or the shop I had install the Moog arms. I don't know if these came in, came installed, but I'll show you how to remove these just so you guys know. I guess I'll just try to prop the front up somewhere. So we got another inverted video here, but here's the big socket. If you don't have an impact, that's okay, but it's going to be a pain. Usually what you can do is if you don't have an impact but you somehow have a grinder, get a grinder to this nut and just notch it a little bit, or just go right over the top. That should help the scenario. But I'm going to use Power of Milwaukee here and just crank this guy off. Makes a lot of noise, and quite frankly, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to reuse these ones because for some reason, I don't know if it's the factory or the shop I had install them, because I don't know if these came pressed in already. They probably did, but for some reason, the factory is doing that. I don't know why. Might just be cheap hardware, which I'd be interested in getting rid of. But yeah, so now you just take a hammer to it and it just pop right out. I would show you that, but the phone is currently propped up on the hammer because I've been out of a tripod. But yeah. So yeah, that's how you essentially just remove the suspension on an xterra. Now for these arms, basically I got these used. Nice. I got these used, and I'm still gonna have to go over a couple spots. But these bushings here are pretty shot, and so I'm going to be removing them and putting new bushings in. There's still a bit of muriatic acid in these, so that's why some of the paint came back up here. But I'm gonna give it another coat, and then I'm gonna bed line them. But yeah, so that's basically how you do the job and why I'm doing the job. So I hope this video helps, and I hope to see you out on the trail, I guess. So a little bonus update for those of you who actually watched my channel before this became a thing. The main project still exists. It's still a project, and it's still kind of just sitting here. But I'll show you what's up with that, and then I'll show you what's up with another project I have. So yeah, here's the Del Sol, which I'm planning on focusing on here pretty soon. It's fully built block. It's got Speed Factory rods and Nippon Racing pistons. Other than that, the crank is stock and the girdle is stock, and it's a stock oil pump. I've got a Gates Blue Belt on it. The head is completely stock, but I plan on building the head here pretty soon. It's got a stage 4 competition clutch in it. My stage 3 just completely shit itself, so that's why I've got a stage 4 in there. This is a max speeding rod GT3582R turbo, Hunter tuned wastegate, and a Rev 9 manifold. I'm having downpipe problems. Basically, I've got this CX Racing downpipe, and they call it a 3-inch downpipe, but the flange is actually 2.5 inches. So I have to adjust that by making myself my own flange, because I cannot seem to find other downpipes for the life of me anymore. I don't know if the EPA cracked down on some people, but I guess we'll see. So yeah, this is kind of the state of it. There's other parts of other vehicles on it, but I've got a lot of parts just sitting ready to be installed, just kind of sitting in it. So I'm going to be focusing on that here pretty soon. Obviously, I got to finish this project. I just need more than one vehicle running right now, just so that I have another one to fall back on in case this is the other project, breaks on me. I don't think it will. She's been doing pretty good. But this is my 2004 Mercury Grand Marquis. It does have a Crown Vic rear end on it. This car started out as silver with really horrible paint. This paint job was done by my dad in this garage with a spray gun, and it came out pretty good. The wheels I have on it, I scored at a junkyard for $170, and I threw on some used tires that I got for $60 a piece in the front. The rears are still pretty bald, and I've got a trip I got to do here in the rain today, so we'll see how that goes. But yeah, so that's the other project. This I'm hoping to lower here pretty soon and get to working on setting this up for more fun. I ultimately got this because I wanted something that I could slide around for pretty cheap, but the axle gearing is not right for it, and it's an open diff, so I gotta, work on that, get all that sorted. I also got this Jeep because of the situation I was having with this, and I felt pretty exhausted about it, and so I bought this Jeep, but I love my truck. So I'm planning on keeping the Xterra as it sits right now, but obviously if I'm having more issues later and I can't seem to fix the problem, I might be getting rid of her. But yeah, we'll see. So that's kind of an update on it, and this video is probably going to be pretty long now, but thank you guys for watching, and that's an update with me, and that's how you do control arms on a Nissan Xterra.